17-year-old Damon clutched his 3-month-old nephew close to his chest as he stood outside the biggest mansion he had ever seen. The baby's tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb, and Damon could feel his heart beating fast against his ribs. This was crazy. What was he doing here? The Whitmore estate stretched out before him like something from a movie. Golden gates that must have cost more than his family's apartment stood between him and the most expensive wedding in the city's history. White roses covered every surface he could see, and even from the street, he could hear the soft music floating through the air. 3 days ago, his sister Maya had been rushed to the hospital. The doctors said there were problems with her recovery after giving birth. Damon had been taking care of baby James ever since, but Maya kept getting worse. The fever made her say strange things, but one name kept coming up over and over again. Victoria Whitmore, she would whisper when she thought no one was listening. She needs to know about James. She needs to know. At first, Damon thought it was just the medicine making his sister confused. Maya was a nursing student who sometimes worked at charity events to make extra money. Why would she know someone like Victoria Whitmore? The Whitmore family owned one of the biggest medicine companies in the country. They were worth billions of dollars. But then Maya pressed an old envelope into his hands. Her eyes were clear for the first time in days when she looked at him. "Take James to her," Maya said. "Look at his eyes, Damon, really look at them. She deserves to know the truth." Damon had looked at baby James many times since he was born. The little boy was beautiful, but there was something different about him. His eyes were not the warm brown that ran in their family. They were bright blue, almost like crystal, and his features were delicate in a way that reminded Damon of someone he had seen before. Now, standing outside the estate where Victoria Whitmore was getting married to some tech billionaire, Damon finally understood what his sister meant. He had studied Victoria's photos online, and the resemblance was impossible to ignore. Baby James had her exact same eyes, the same nose, even the same way of moving his tiny hands. Security guards in expensive black suits walked around the property. There had to be at least 20 of them, all wearing earpieces and sunglasses. Damon pulled his worn jacket tighter around himself and baby James. He looked nothing like the guests who were arriving in cars that cost more than most people made in a year. Women in designer dresses stepped out of luxury vehicles, their jewelry catching the afternoon sunlight. Men in perfect suits followed behind them, checking their expensive watches and talking on phones that probably cost more than Damon's family made in months. Everyone looked like they belonged in a magazine. Damon felt completely out of place. His sneakers had holes in them and his jeans were faded from too many trips to the laundromat. The baby's clothes were clean, but obviously secondhand. What was he thinking? How could someone like him possibly get close to someone like Victoria Whitmore? But then baby James made a soft sound and Damon looked down at those incredible blue eyes. This little boy deserved to know who his mother was. Maya was fighting for her life in the hospital, and she had trusted Damon with the most important thing she could give him: the truth. The wedding was supposed to start in 2 hours. Damon had read about it online. 300 of the richest and most powerful people in the country would be there. The wedding dress alone cost more money than his family had ever seen. The flowers were flown in from 3 different countries, and the cake was made by some famous chef from France. Victoria Whitmore was marrying Jonathan Sterling, the man who created some app that everyone used on their phones. Together, they would be worth almost $20 billion. The newspapers called it the wedding of the century. They said it was like a fairy tale, but Damon knew something the newspapers didn't know. He knew that Victoria Whitmore had a son, and that son was sleeping peacefully in his arms right now. He walked around the edge of the property looking for any way to get inside. The main gate was impossible. Too many guards and too many people checking invitations. But there had to be another way. There were always delivery trucks and catering people at big events like this. Sure enough, around the back of the estate, Damon found the service entrance. White trucks were coming and going, bringing flowers and food and all the things needed for a perfect wedding. Men and women in black uniforms hurried back and forth carrying boxes and talking into headsets. Damon watched them for a while, trying to figure out how to blend in. Baby James was starting to get fussy, probably because it was almost time for his bottle. Damon bounced him gently, whispering soft words to keep him calm. "Just a little longer, buddy," he said. "We're going to meet your mom today." A group of catering workers came outside for a break. They were young, probably not much older than Damon himself. They lit cigarettes and complained about their boss, who apparently had been yelling at everyone all morning. Damon took a deep breath and walked over to them. His heart was pounding, but he tried to look casual. "Hey," he said, shifting Baby James to one arm. "I'm supposed to be working the event today, but I got separated from my supervisor. Do you know where I should check in?" One of the workers, a girl with short hair and tired eyes, looked at him suspiciously. "I haven't seen you before. Who are you working for?" Damon's mind raced. He needed to think fast. "The baby stuff," he said, trying to sound confident. "You know, some of the guests have kids. I'm supposed to help with childcare during the ceremony." It wasn't completely a lie. He was definitely good with babies, thanks to taking care of James for the past 3 days. The girl's expression softened when she saw Baby James. "Oh, he's adorable. How old is he?" 3 months, Damon said, and he could hear the pride in his own voice. "He's my nephew." "That's so sweet that you're bringing him to work," another worker said. "My supervisor is inside somewhere. Just tell them Maria sent you." Damon couldn't believe his luck. He thanked them and headed toward the service entrance, his heart still racing but feeling more hopeful than he had all day. Inside the mansion, Damon felt like he had stepped into another world. The ceilings were so high he had to crane his neck to see them. Paintings that looked like they belonged in museums hung on every wall. The floors were made of marble that reflected the light from crystal chandeliers, and everything smelled like expensive flowers. The kitchen was chaos. Dozens of people in white uniforms rushed around, preparing food that looked more like art than anything Damon had ever eaten. Servers practiced carrying trays of champagne glasses, and someone was yelling about the timing of the appetizers. Damon grabbed an extra uniform jacket that someone had left on a chair and put it on over his own clothes. Baby James was hidden underneath a white cloth that was meant to cover catering supplies. From a distance, it might look like Damon was carrying a tray or a box. He followed the flow of workers through hallways that seemed to go on forever. Everywhere he looked, there were signs of incredible wealth. Vases that probably cost more than a car, rugs that looked like they came from ancient palaces, and windows that showed off gardens that seemed to stretch for miles. The sound of music was getting louder. Damon could hear people laughing and talking, the kind of relaxed conversation that came from people who never had to worry about money or food or whether they could pay rent next month. Through a pair of massive doors, Damon caught his first glimpse of the main reception area. It was like something from a fairy tale. White flowers everywhere, tables set with more plates and glasses than seemed necessary, and a dance floor that sparkled under lights that hung from the ceiling like stars. And there in the center of it all was Victoria Whitmore. She was even more beautiful in person than in her photos. Her dress was simple but perfect, flowing around her like water. Her hair was pulled back in a style that looked effortless but probably took hours to create. She moved through the crowd with grace, smiling and talking to guests, but Damon noticed something that the cameras probably missed. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. There was something sad about the way she held herself, like she was playing a part in a play rather than celebrating the happiest day of her life. When she thought no one was looking, her shoulders would slump just a little, and she would take a deep breath like she was trying to gather strength. Damon understood that feeling. He had felt it many times when he had to pretend everything was okay when it wasn't. When his family didn't have enough money for groceries, or when Maya was working 3 jobs just to pay for nursing school, or when the electricity got turned off because they couldn't pay the bill. But this was different. Victoria Whitmore had everything anyone could want. So why did she look so lonely? Baby James stirred under the cloth, and Damon realized he was running out of time. The ceremony was going to start soon, and once it did, it would be impossible to get close to Victoria. Security would be even tighter, and everyone would be focused on the wedding. He positioned himself near the grand staircase where he had seen Victoria go earlier. According to what he had overheard from the wedding planners, she would come down these stairs in about 30 minutes to begin the ceremony. Damon's hands were shaking as he held baby James close. This was really happening. In a few minutes, he was going to change everything for this woman, for his nephew, and probably for himself too. He just hoped he was doing the right thing. Damon stood near the grand staircase, his heart beating so loud he was sure everyone could hear it. Baby James was getting restless under the white cloth, making small sounds that made Damon nervous. He bounced gently, trying to keep his nephew calm while watching the wealthy guests move around the reception area. The difference between his world and theirs hit him like a punch to the stomach. Women wore jewelry that sparkled brighter than anything he had ever seen. Their dresses probably cost more than his family made in a year. Men talked casually about business deals worth millions of dollars like they were discussing the weather. Damon pulled the catering jacket tighter around himself and tried to blend in with the other workers. A server walked past carrying a tray of champagne glasses, each one filled with bubbles that caught the light from the chandeliers. Damon had never tasted champagne in his life. "Excuse me," a voice said behind him. Damon turned around, his stomach dropping. A security guard in a black suit was looking at him with suspicious eyes. The man was tall and broad, with the kind of build that said he could handle trouble without breaking a sweat. "Can I help you?" the guard asked, his hand resting on something attached to his belt. Damon's mouth went dry, but he forced himself to speak normally. "I'm with the catering team," he said, hoping his voice didn't shake. "Just making sure everything is ready for the ceremony." The guard looked him up and down, taking in his worn sneakers and the way he was holding what looked like a bundle of catering supplies. Baby James chose that moment to make a soft cooing sound. "What's in the cloth?" the guard asked, stepping closer. Damon's mind raced. He could feel sweat starting to form on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. "Just some extra napkins and things," he said. "You know how these fancy events are. They want backups for everything." The guard reached out like he was going to pull back the cloth, and Damon felt panic rise in his chest. But then a woman's voice called out from across the room. "Robert, I need you over here now." The guard looked annoyed but stepped back. "Stay where you're supposed to be," he told Damon before walking away toward whoever had called him. Damon let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. That was too close. He needed to find a better place to wait, somewhere less obvious, but still close enough to see Victoria when she came down the stairs. He moved toward a corner where some large flower arrangements provided cover. From here he could see most of the reception area, but was partially hidden from the guards. Baby James seemed to sense his nervousness and settled down, his tiny fist gripping Damon's finger through the cloth. The guests were getting more excited as the ceremony time approached. Damon could hear them talking about how beautiful Victoria looked, how perfect the wedding was going to be, how Jonathan was such a lucky man. Some of them had been at other weddings of rich and famous people, and they compared this one to those, like they were rating movies. "The flowers alone must have cost $500,000, one woman said to her friend as they walked past Damon's hiding spot. "Did you see the ring Jonathan gave her?" another woman replied. 20 carats, I heard it's bigger than anything I've ever seen." Damon thought about his sister Maya lying in the hospital bed, fighting for her life because she couldn't afford better medical care. The contrast made him feel angry and sad at the same time. All this money being spent on one day, on flowers and champagne and dresses that would only be worn once, while people like Maya suffered because they didn't have enough. But then he looked down at baby James and remembered why he was here. This wasn't about money or fairness or the way the world worked. This was about a little boy who deserved to know his mother, and a mother who deserved to know she had a son. The music in the room changed, becoming softer and more elegant. Damon realized this must be the signal that the ceremony was about to begin. Guests started moving toward their seats, arranged in perfect rows facing a beautiful archway covered in white roses. Photography crews moved into position, their expensive cameras ready to capture every moment of what the newspapers were calling the wedding of the century. Damon recognized some of the photographers from pictures he had seen online. These were people who normally took pictures of movie stars and presidents. A wedding planner in a sharp gray suit walked quickly through the room, speaking into a headset and checking details on a tablet. Everything had to be perfect for Victoria, Whitmore's big day. Nothing could go wrong. Except Damon was about to make sure something did go wrong. Very wrong. He heard footsteps on the marble floor above, and knew Victoria must be getting ready to make her entrance. His palms were sweating, now, and he wiped them on his borrowed jacket. Baby James seemed to sense something important was happening and opened his bright blue eyes, looking up at Damon with an expression that seemed almost wise for such a tiny person. "This is it, buddy," Damon whispered. "We're about to meet your mom." The wedding march began playing, a beautiful melody that filled the huge room with sound. All the guests stood up and turned toward the staircase, their faces expectant and excited. Cameras flashed as photographers got ready for the perfect shot. And then Victoria appeared at the top of the stairs. Damon's breath caught in his throat. She was absolutely stunning. Her wedding dress seemed to float around her as she stood there for a moment, letting the photographers capture the image. Her veil trailed behind her like a cloud, and the tiara in her hair caught the light from the chandeliers. But even from his hiding spot across the room, Damon could see what he had noticed before. Despite all the beauty and perfection surrounding her, Victoria looked sad. Her smile was perfect for the cameras, but her eyes seemed empty, like she was somewhere else entirely. She began walking down the stairs, moving slowly and gracefully, as the music played. Each step brought her closer to Damon's hiding place. The guests watched in admiration, some of the women dabbing at their eyes with expensive handkerchiefs. Jonathan Sterling stood at the bottom of the stairs waiting for his bride. He was exactly what Damon had expected from the pictures. Tall, confident, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. He smiled up at Victoria, but even his smile seemed more like a business deal than love. Damon realized this was his moment. Victoria would pass right by his hiding spot on her way to the ceremony. If he was going to do this, it had to be now. His hands shook as he adjusted baby James in his arms and pulled back part of the white cloth. The baby's blue eyes were wide open now, as if he understood that something important was about to happen. Victoria was halfway down the stairs, moving like a princess in a fairy tale. The music swelled around her, and every eye in the room was focused on her beauty and grace. This was supposed to be the happiest moment of her life. Damon stepped out from behind the flower arrangement. At first, nobody noticed him. He was just another worker in the background, not important enough to pay attention to. But as he moved closer to the staircase, some of the guests began to look confused. Why was a catering person walking toward the bride? Victoria was almost at the bottom of the stairs now. She would turn toward the ceremony area in just a few seconds, and then it would be too late. Damon would never get another chance like this. He pulled the cloth completely away from baby James, revealing the little boy's face to the room. The baby blinked in the bright light, his blue eyes searching the faces around him until they found Victoria. And that's when everything changed. Victoria's foot missed the next step. She caught herself on the banister, her graceful walk suddenly interrupted. Her eyes had found baby James, and Damon watched as her face went completely white. The music continued playing, but some of the guests were starting to murmur. Why had the bride stopped? What was wrong? Victoria stared at baby James like she had seen a ghost. Her free hand went to her throat, and Damon could see that she was having trouble breathing. Recognition was dawning in her eyes, the same recognition that had hit Damon when he really looked at his nephew for the first time. "Ma'am," Damon said, his voice carrying across the sudden quiet in the room. Some of the musicians had stopped playing when they noticed something was wrong. Victoria's eyes moved from the baby to Damon's face. She opened her mouth like she was going to speak, but no words came out. Security guards were starting to move toward them now, but they seemed confused. This wasn't a typical threat. This was just a young man with a baby, and the bride seemed to know them somehow. Jonathan Sterling looked angry and confused at the bottom of the stairs. "Victoria, what's going on?" he called out, but she didn't seem to hear him. Damon knew he only had seconds before the guards reached him. He had to say what he came to say, had to deliver Maya's message before it was too late. "My sister Maya wanted you to meet your son," he said, his voice getting stronger as he spoke the words that would change everything. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Guests gasped and started talking all at once. Cameras flashed as photographers realized they were witnessing something incredible. Cell phones came out as people started recording what was happening. But all Damon could focus on was Victoria's face. Tears were starting to form in her eyes as she looked back and forth between him and baby James. Her perfect composure was cracking, and for the first time since he had seen her, she looked real. She looked human. "Maya," she whispered, so quietly that only Damon could hear her over the noise of the crowd. She remembered. After all this time, after all the luxury and privilege that separated her world from theirs, she remembered his sister. The ballroom exploded into chaos. Guests were talking loudly, pointing at Damon and baby James, their expensive champagne glasses forgotten in their hands. Some people stood on their chairs to get a better look at what was happening. The photographers pushed forward, their cameras clicking rapidly as they realized they were witnessing the story of the year. Victoria stood frozen on the staircase, one hand gripping the marble banister so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Tears were streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. She looked like she might collapse at any moment. "Security!" Jonathan Sterling shouted from the bottom of the stairs, his face red with anger and embarrassment. "Get this person out of here immediately!" 3 guards in black suits started moving toward Damon, but Victoria suddenly found her voice. "Wait," she said, her voice shaky but clear enough for everyone to hear. "Don't touch him." The guards stopped, looking confused. They turned to Jonathan for direction, but Victoria was already walking down the remaining steps toward Damon and the baby. Her wedding dress trailed behind her, the beautiful white fabric now seeming less like a fairy tale and more like a costume she wanted to take off. The room fell silent except for the clicking of camera shutters. Even the musicians had stopped playing, their instruments hanging forgotten in their hands. 300 of the richest people in the country watched as Victoria Whitmore approached the young man who had just turned her wedding day upside down. Damon's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Baby James was looking around, at all the faces staring at them, his blue eyes wide but calm. The little boy didn't understand what was happening, but he seemed comfortable in Damon's arms. Victoria stopped just a few feet away from them. Up close, Damon could see that her hands were shaking. She was looking at baby James like she couldn't believe he was real. "Maya," she whispered again, and this time more people heard her. "Maya Washington. Is she okay?" Damon felt his throat tighten. This was the hardest part, the part he had been dreading since he left the hospital. "She's very sick," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "The doctors aren't sure if she's going to make it." Victoria's hand flew to her mouth and she made a sound like a sob. Some of the guests gasped, finally understanding that this wasn't some crazy person making up stories. This was real. "I remember her," Victoria said, her voice getting stronger. "The charity event at Mercy General Hospital. She was volunteering, helping with the nursing students' presentation. She was so smart, so kind. When everyone else was trying to impress me, she just talked to me like I was a normal person." Jonathan Sterling pushed through the crowd, his perfect composure completely gone. "Victoria, what are you talking about? You're not making any sense. This is our wedding day." But Victoria ignored him completely. She was focused entirely on baby James, who had started making soft cooing sounds. Can I hold him?" she asked Damon, her voice barely above a whisper. Damon looked into her eyes and saw something he hadn't expected. He saw the same look his sister Maya got whenever she looked at baby James. Pure, unconditional love. Without saying a word, he carefully placed the baby in Victoria's arms. The moment baby James settled against Victoria's chest, something magical happened. The little boy looked up at her with those bright blue eyes, and a tiny smile crossed his face. It was like he recognized her, like some part of him knew exactly who she was. Victoria broke down completely. She held baby James close and cried like her heart was breaking. But these weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of joy mixed with grief, love mixed with regret, and overwhelming gratitude mixed with terrible fear. "He's beautiful," she whispered, touching his tiny hand with one finger. "He's absolutely perfect." The guests were getting restless. Some of them were clearly uncomfortable with this public display of emotion. Others were recording everything on their phones, already planning how they would tell this story to their friends. The photographers were having a field day, capturing every moment of what would become one of the most famous wedding disasters in history. But Damon only cared about one thing. He pulled the envelope Maya had given him from his jacket pocket. It was worn and creased from being carried around for 3 days, but the handwriting on the front was still clear. "For Victoria." "My sister wanted you to have this," he said, holding out the envelope. Victoria looked at it like it might explode. She was still holding baby James with one arm, and she reached out with her free hand to take the envelope. Her fingers were trembling as she opened it and pulled out a single sheet of paper. As she read, her face went through a dozen different emotions. Damon couldn't see what Maya had written, but he could guess. His sister had always been good with words, and she would have wanted Victoria to understand everything. How much she had cared about her, how difficult it had been to keep the secret, and how much she wanted what was best for baby James. "She never asked me for anything," Victoria said after she finished reading, her voice full of wonder. "Not money, not help, nothing. She just wanted me to know that I had a son." Jonathan Sterling had been getting angrier and angrier as the minutes passed. Now he exploded. "This is ridiculous," he shouted loud enough for everyone to hear. "Victoria, you're being manipulated. This person is obviously trying to get money from you. Can't you see that?" For the first time since baby James had been placed in her arms, Victoria looked up at Jonathan. The expression on her face was one Damon had never seen before. Cold, disappointed, and completely done with pretending. "Money?" she said, her voice cutting through the noise of the crowd. "You think this is about money? Look at this baby, Jonathan. Really look at him." She turned baby James so that everyone in the room could see his face clearly. Under the bright lights of the chandeliers, the resemblance between Victoria and the baby was impossible to deny. They had the same eyes, the same nose, even the same way of moving their hands. "He's my son," Victoria said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I don't need a DNA test to know that. I can feel it in my heart." The crowd erupted again. Some people were shocked, others were excited by the drama, and a few looked genuinely happy for Victoria. But Jonathan Sterling looked like he had been hit by lightning. "Your son?" he repeated, his voice getting higher. "Victoria, we're supposed to be getting married right now. We have 300 guests here. Do you know how much this wedding cost?" Victoria looked around the ballroom, at the expensive flowers, the crystal glasses, the designer dresses, and the faces of people who cared more about the scandal than about her happiness. For the first time in her life, she saw it all clearly. "Yes," she said simply. "I know exactly how much it cost, and none of it matters." She started walking toward the exit, still holding baby James. Damon followed her, not sure what else to do. Behind them, the wedding guests were in complete chaos. Some were following them, others were arguing among themselves, and the photographers were practically climbing over each other to get the best shots. "Victoria," Jonathan called after her, "don't be stupid. Think about what you're doing. Think about your family's reputation." Victoria stopped and turned around one more time. When she spoke, her voice was calm and clear, and everyone in the room could hear her. "I've spent my entire life thinking about my family's reputation," she said. "I've done everything I was supposed to do, married who I was supposed to marry, lived the life everyone else planned for me. But this little boy is the first real thing that's ever happened to me." She looked down at baby James, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms despite all the noise and commotion around him. "I want to go to the hospital," she announced. "I want to see Maya, and I want to learn how to be the mother my son deserves." Victoria's father, Robert Whitmore, pushed through the crowd. His face was purple with rage, and Damon could see where Victoria got her strength from. Even angry, there was something powerful about the way he carried himself. "Victoria Elizabeth Whitmore," he said in a voice that probably made business executives tremble. You will not embarrass this family any further. Get back up those stairs and finish this ceremony right now. But Victoria had found something in herself that she had never known existed. She looked at her father, the man who had controlled every aspect of her life since she was born, and shook her head. No, Daddy, she said, using the childhood name she hadn't called him in years. I'm done being who you want me to be. I'm going to be who my son needs me to be. She turned to Damon, her eyes clear and determined for the first time since he had seen her. Will you take me to see Maya? She asked. I need to tell her how sorry I am that I didn't know. I need to tell her that I'm going to take care of our son. Damon nodded, unable to speak around the lump in his throat. This wasn't how he had imagined things would go, but it was better than anything he had dared to hope for. Together, they walked toward the exit of the ballroom. Behind them, the wedding of the century dissolved into chaos, but neither of them looked back. Victoria Whitmore had finally chosen love over duty, truth over convenience, and her son over everything else. As they reached the door, baby James opened his eyes and looked up at his mother. For the first time in her life, Victoria felt complete. Victoria walked through the mansion's grand hallway, still wearing her wedding dress but carrying baby James like he was the most precious thing in the world. Her heels clicked on the marble floor, echoing through the quiet space that just minutes ago had been filled with wedding music and laughter. Damon walked beside her, still not quite believing what was happening. He had imagined this moment 100 different ways during the past 3 days, but none of his daydreams had prepared him for the reality. Victoria Whitmore, one of the richest women in the country, was leaving her own wedding to go see his dying sister in a public hospital. Behind them, they could still hear the chaos from the ballroom. Voices were raised, people were arguing, and someone was shouting orders about damage control and press statements. But Victoria didn't look back, once. Her entire focus was on the baby in her arms and the journey ahead. My car is just a beat-up old Honda, Damon said as they approached the front entrance. It's not exactly what you're used to. Victoria looked at him with a small smile, the first genuine smile he had seen from her all day. I don't care if we have to walk, she said. I just need to get to Maya. The front doors of the mansion opened, and they stepped outside into the afternoon sunlight. The contrast was striking. Victoria in her designer wedding dress worth more than most people's houses, holding a baby dressed in simple clothes from the discount store, walking toward a rusty car that had seen better days. The media was already gathering outside the gates. News travels fast when it involves billionaires and weddings gone wrong. Camera crews were setting up and reporters were talking rapidly into microphones trying to break the story first. Damon's car looked even worse next to the luxury vehicles still parked in the driveway. The paint was faded. There was a dent in the passenger door and the back window was held together with tape. But Victoria didn't hesitate for a second. She carefully got into the passenger seat, adjusting baby James so he would be safe during the drive. The hospital is about 20 minutes away, Damon said as he started the engine. It coughed and sputtered before finally catching. Maya is in the intensive care unit. She's been unconscious since yesterday. Victoria nodded, her eyes never leaving baby James's face. Tell me about her, she said quietly. Tell me about my son's mother. As they drove through the city, Damon found himself talking about Maya in a way he never had before. He told Victoria about how his sister had worked 3 jobs to pay for nursing school, how she volunteered at the hospital even when she was exhausted, how she always put other people's needs before her own. She never told me about that night, Damon said, glancing at Victoria as they stopped at a red light. The charity event where you two met. But afterward, she was different. Happier, but also sadder somehow. Like she had experienced something beautiful that she knew she couldn't keep. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. I remember feeling the same way, she finally said. That night was the first time in years that someone had talked to me like I was just a regular person. Maya asked me about my dreams, not my bank account. She wanted to know what made me happy, not what business deals my father was working on. They drove past the fancy shopping districts where Victoria probably did most of her shopping, through middle-class neighborhoods where people like Damon's family could never afford to live, and finally into the area where the public hospital sat like a concrete fortress against poverty and disease. Mercy General Hospital was nothing like the luxury medical centers where rich people went when they got sick. The parking lot was full of old cars like Damon's, and the building itself looked like it needed repairs that would probably never come. But inside those walls, doctors and nurses worked miracles every day with whatever resources they had. Victoria looked around as they parked, taking in the reality of where her son had been born and where his mother was fighting for her life. There were no marble floors here, no crystal chandeliers, no staff in designer uniforms, just tired medical workers doing their best to help people who couldn't afford to go anywhere else. "She's on the 4th floor," Damon said as they walked through the hospital's front doors. The lobby was crowded with families waiting for news about their loved ones, children playing quietly in the corner, and elderly people sitting in wheelchairs with blankets pulled up to their chins. Victoria drew some stares as they made their way to the elevators. Even without her wedding veil, she looked completely out of place in her expensive dress and jewelry. But she didn't seem to notice or care. All her attention was focused on baby James, who had woken up and was looking around with curious eyes. The elevator was slow and made concerning noises as it climbed to the 4th floor. When the doors finally opened, they were greeted by the familiar smells and sounds of a hospital: antiseptic, beeping machines, and the quiet conversations of medical staff. Damon led Victoria down a hallway lined with rooms full of people fighting battles that the outside world never heard about. They passed families gathered around beds, holding hands and praying, hoping for good news that might never come. Maya's room was near the end of the hall. Through the small window in the door, Damon could see his sister lying still and pale in the hospital bed, connected to machines that beeped steadily, monitoring her vital signs. She looked so young and fragile, nothing like the strong woman who had raised him after their parents died. "She's been like this since yesterday morning," Damon said, his voice thick with emotion. "The doctors say her body is just too weak. Having James took everything she had." Victoria's eyes filled with tears as she looked through the window at the woman who had given birth to her son. "She's beautiful," she whispered, "just like I remembered." They entered the room quietly, not wanting to disturb the peace that seemed to surround Maya despite all the medical equipment. Victoria approached the bed slowly, still holding baby James, who had become unusually quiet, as if he sensed the importance of this moment. "Maya," Victoria said softly, sitting down in the chair beside the bed. "It's Victoria. I'm here, and I brought James to see you." For a moment, nothing happened. The machines continued their steady beeping, and Maya remained still. But then, almost like a miracle, Maya's eyes fluttered open. They were unfocused at first, cloudy from medication and illness, but they gradually found Victoria's face. "Victoria?" Maya's voice was barely a whisper, so quiet that Victoria had to lean close to hear her. "I'm here," Victoria said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry I didn't know. I'm so sorry you went through this alone." Maya's eyes moved to baby James, and despite her weakness, she managed a small smile. "He's perfect, isn't he?" she said. "He has your eyes." "He's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," Victoria replied, moving closer so Maya could see her son better. "Maya, I want you to know that I'm going to take care of him. I'm going to love him the way you would want me to." Maya tried to reach out toward the baby, and Victoria carefully placed baby James on the bed beside his mother. The little boy seemed to recognize Maya's voice and touch, making soft cooing sounds that filled the quiet room with unexpected joy. "I wrote you a letter," Maya whispered. "Did Damon give it to you?" "Yes," Victoria said. "You told me that you never expected anything from me, that you just wanted me to know James existed. But Maya, I want to give you everything. I want to make sure you get the best medical care money can buy. I want to help you get better so we can raise our son together." Maya shook her head weakly. "The doctors already told me," she said. My Body can't fight anymore. But that's okay because now I know James will be loved. That's all I ever wanted. The three of them, mother, birth mother, and son, spent the next hour together in that small hospital room. Victoria learned about the first 3 months of James's life, about his feeding schedule, about the songs Maya sang to help him sleep. Maya got to see her son being held by the woman she had fallen in love with 18 months ago, the woman who would now be his mother. As the afternoon turned to evening, Maya grew weaker, but she seemed peaceful, more relaxed than she had been since James was born. She had carried the secret of his parentage for so long, and now that burden was finally lifted. Take care of each other, Maya whispered to Victoria as the sun began to set outside the hospital window. Love him enough for both of us, Victoria promised, holding baby James close while keeping one hand on Maya's arm. I will never let him. Forget how much you loved him, she said. He'll know that he had 2 mothers who would have done anything for him. 3 days later, Maya passed away peacefully in her sleep. Victoria was there, holding her hand, making sure she wasn't alone. The funeral was small but meaningful, attended by Maya's nursing school classmates, some hospital staff who remembered her kindness, and Victoria, who had learned more about love and sacrifice in 1 week than she had in her entire privileged life. The newspapers and magazines had a field day with the story, of course. They called it everything from the wedding scandal of the century to a modern fairy tale. Some painted Victoria as a villain who had abandoned her responsibilities, others as a hero who chose love over duty. But Victoria didn't care what they wrote about her. She was too busy learning how to be a mother to baby James, how to change diapers and warm bottles and sing lullabies at 3 in the morning. She sold the mansion and moved to a smaller house with a yard where James could play when he got older. She started a foundation in Maya's name, providing scholarships for nursing students and better medical care for mothers who couldn't afford it. She wanted to make sure that no other woman would have to choose between getting medical care and providing for her child. Jonathan Sterling tried to sue her for breach of contract and public embarrassment, but Victoria's lawyers handled it quietly. She never spoke to him again after that day at the hospital. Her father eventually came around, especially after he met his grandson and saw how happy Victoria had become. I've never seen you smile like this, he told her one day as they watched baby James take his first steps in the garden. Maybe you made the right choice after all. Years later, when James was old enough to understand, Victoria would tell him the story of how a brave young man named Damon brought him to meet his mother at the most important moment of both their lives. She would tell him about Maya's courage and love, about the sacrifice she made to give him life, and about the day that changed everything for all of them. And James would grow up knowing that he was loved by 2 mothers, one who gave him life, and one who gave him a future, brought together by the kind of love that doesn't care about money or status or what other people think. He would understand that sometimes the most important truths come from the most unexpected places, and that real love always finds a way.